Hey guys, today I'm back in Dream Car Builder after a little while, and I want to try making one of those DaVinci spiral helicopter things, but as a drone. Now, the game won't make it work on exactly the same principles as the real thing, but I think it should still be able to work nevertheless. So, let's get right into it. So just starting out here in the sandbox, so you see the first thing I'm doing, just deleting the UFO that I made in the previous video, and once I was done with that, I just want to start working on the frame for this. Now, originally, see, I'm putting out a lot of framing pieces, and I was looking to kind of get an oval shape for the body of this, but I ended up deleting it because I realized it's kind of a lot of extra weight, and I just wanted to start with the simplest design possible to see if this could even get off the ground. So starting out here, you can see a much simpler design, trying to brace it as best as I can with as few pieces as possible, and expand it out like this. Once I'm done with that though, start working on the three-dimensional structure, and to do this, pretty simple as well. You can see here going for some cross braces, and you can see here testing it out. Seems to all hold together and look good. So with that done, I actually optimized it and removed a bunch of extra wood pieces. Next thing I'm doing here is trying to put in the propeller. Now to just start out, I wanted to go with like the simplest design possible, and I figured that's just using a single panel like this and seeing where that gets me. So I tried to brace it together like this. Once I did that, I ended up connecting it to the bottom as well to hopefully keep it straight up and down. And finally here, you can see I'm putting down the jet like this. And I ended up lowering the power of the jet just a little bit, and you can see here, seems to all be holding up well enough, but the jet's sort of bobbing up and down a bit. And when I tried to take off, it wasn't really getting anywhere, and the jet was sort of going crazy. So what I wanted to do here was just brace the jet a little bit better, and I was hoping with this, I'd be able to get off the ground. But it just didn't seem to be there yet. You can see it's a little bit better. The jet's holding it a little bit better on there, but it's still just doing its thing where it bounces up and down. So I ended up lowering the weight of the entire thing, and once I did that, it was getting off the ground, but only because it weighed so little, the jet was just sort of forcing it right up. So I decided to add on a second one of these panels, and you can see here, it actually looks pretty good. It seems to be relatively stable. It's bouncing a little bit, but that should be fine. And with that all ready to go, I turned on the lift coefficient to actually make these panels produce some lift, but it still wasn't coming off the ground. And I was a little confused why this wasn't working, but when I looked at this in slow motion, it was a little bit more obvious. The jets were sort of just moving whatever way they wanted, and the panels were getting distorted as well. So I ended up bracing it together a little bit better, and you can see here, finally, I am getting off the ground. It's spinning out a little bit. That's not really a concern, but everything else looks pretty good here. And with that ready to go, I decided to delete the extra panel I had, and with that done, I wanted to start working on the actual spiral. Now, this was a lot harder than I was expecting, and trying to get this looking good was pretty much impossible. I tried adding on some pieces at first, kind of randomly, to see if I could feel out the design, but I wasn't even close. And after a while, I started connecting some stuff together, and it still just wasn't looking very good, but I realized there's kind of an important detail to making the spiral that makes it a lot easier to make. First of all, going for a much more gradual slope is very important, because when you think of the spiral, at any point, it doesn't really go up really steep, it just slowly goes all the way up to the top. Now, I also realized another important detail of this, and this one's a little hard to explain. If you think of the spiral, for any point on the central axis, you should be able to draw a line coming straight out of the middle. That line should be perfectly parallel with the spiral at that point. Basically, that means if you put a ball on the spiral at any point, it shouldn't tend to roll to one side or the other, it should just roll straight down the spiral. And now that I'm saying it out loud, it's kind of confusing, but it really helped me try to create this, and you can see here, I slowly start to build up. Now I ended up deciding that every other panel should go up 1/10 of a meter, so that I get this slow slope going all the way up. And I also realized that the way I had my spiral going, it was actually not orbiting around the central shaft, it was orbiting around a point a little bit to the left of it, so I had to move some stuff around, and you can see here, there's like a hole in the middle, and in the center of that hole is the central axis. So after shifting that stuff around, it was a lot of just placing panels and moving joints around so they look about right, but you can see now putting in the final panel, I get this really nice sort of spiral going up, but it's not that tall, and to make it taller, I had the idea of just copying the spiral over, because really I didn't need to recreate anything, I could just copy what I had before, stack it right on top, connect it with a couple panels, and you can see here, I get this nice kind of 2 or 3 layer spiral depending how you look at it, and with that done, I tried to load it and view it, but I forgot to attach it, so it just didn't show up. So I attached it with a single framing piece, and you can see here, loads in just fine, not doing anything weird. It falls down and breaks apart, but I didn't end up supporting it yet, so that was sort of to be expected. So to solve it from falling apart, what I need to do is use a bunch of framing pieces to hold the whole thing together. Now I ended up doing all of them on the inner blue nodes. On the outside, I have a whole bunch as well. Now inside of that, I also need to attach them to the bottom joint as well. And once I do that, you can see it's pretty stabilized, but to hopefully just really get it as stable as possible, I ended up adding a few beams in the spiral itself to try to hold the top and the bottom layers together. And once I had all those braced up, I ended up setting the lift coefficient on all of these panels to be at the absolute maximum. Now, I forgot that you could just double click on any of the panels to select all of them, so I ended up doing a bunch of them manually, but once I figured that out, I selected all of them, set them all to the max, and loading in, it's a little unstable in the bottom, but it's holding together, so I was pretty hopeful this would work. So with that done, I added in some cross braces here to hopefully get the whole thing to be stabilized, and once I had those braces put in place, the next thing I wanted to do is add in some jets. Now, these jets are here to hopefully spin the entire thing up at once, and once that happens, it should be able to create some lift. So I get the structure to hold the jets in place. You can see I'm putting that on the bottom here, and the reason I'm not just attaching the jets directly to the spiral is mainly just for aesthetics. I like the idea of putting it a bit lower so it looks a bit more controlled. I didn't have it perfectly attached at first here, so you can see it's a little bit loose. So I need to add another framing piece to hopefully hold that in together. And once I did that, I just need to add 4 more framing pieces to hold the part with the jets on it directly to the part with the spiral. And with that done, you can see here, spiral spinning up just fine. And once I have it sort of screwing into the ground, it is actually generating some lift. It's not quite getting off the ground, but it's pretty close to it. And you can see when I throw it off this building, it seems to actually be holding itself up reasonably well. Now I'm spinning out here. That's actually okay, because once I have the drone put in place, you'll see I have 4 of these, and they're specifically put in place to cancel out that torque that's being created. So you can see here, I'm copying in those 2 blades, and with symmetry mode, it should automatically make them spin in opposite directions, but they should both generate lift in the same direction. So with that done and back, you can see I'm copying it over to the front, and I'm also copying these in so that the direction it spins in the back is opposite from the front. So in the front, they still spin in opposite directions, but it's the diagonals that actually spin in the same direction. Now, I don't really know if there's a reason to make them this mismatched like that, but it should reduce any vibrations or any other problems like that, and it definitely should cancel out all the torques being created. So with that looking good, you can see here I wanted to give it a test, and I wasn't really sure what to expect, but when I tried powering this up, it got off the ground, which is good, and then it just worked. It seemed to be going back for a bit, but it seemed to correct itself too, and just this plain mechanism on its own without any other controls seems to be pretty stable. And this kind of stuff just doesn't really happen, and I think part of the reason might just be that there's so much surface area on all of these spinning blades that it's basically like having massive propeller blades, and it just wants to stay up and doesn't want to fall down too quickly. Now I ended up lowering these blades down a little bit just to see if that would improve stability at all, and it definitely made it look a little bit better too. But you can see here, it seems to be a little bit more stable. In fact, it's not tilting back at all or anything. In fact, now it has a slight positive tilt, so it actually wants to start going forward. So with that looking great, the next thing I wanted to do is start working on the controls to make it tilt forward and back and left and right. And to do that, you can see here I'm adding on some extra jets underneath the jets that are already there. And what these jets are going to do is they're going to be really weak, and then just add a little bit of power to the front or the back. You can see that happening here. Right now they're adding a little bit of upward lift, and with this I should be able to tilt back just slightly, since the 2 blades in the front should be going slightly faster than the ones in the back, and therefore creating a little bit more lift. But this didn't really seem to happen. You can see here it's tilting slightly forward. I think the problem is that the jet's weight in the front is more significant than any of the thrust they're producing, so it ends up just tilting in that direction. So I added those jets into the back as well to hopefully evenly distribute it, and it kind of seemed to be working. I was able to tilt backward here just like I was trying to do before, and in theory I should be able to tilt forward as well. Now to get the left-right working, I ended up inverting one of the jets in the front, and you can see here, now the 2 blades are spinning in the same direction. That means one of these blades is going to be creating a force up and the other one down, and you can see here I slowly kind of start to turn to the one direction, and with this I'm kind of able to move side to side. Now it's not great, and especially at high speeds, this side to side control becomes completely unresponsive, but when I'm just trying to hover around, it seems to be okay. And in this flight, I wanted to try landing on another building just to see how well it would work, and it wasn't really that great. The problem is just that it's really unresponsive, so trying to land where I want to go ends up being kind of a disaster, and I missed the building by quite a bit. So what I did is actually made these jets much bigger, and I was hoping that this extra size, they'd be able to really create some extra torque, but it just didn't seem to happen, and for some reason, started to make the front tilt forward really badly. I'm not entirely sure why this happened, but I ended up deciding to delete those jets just because they didn't really feel that good to use, and instead I wanted to try using some rods to compress the entire spiral, and what this would do is create a little bit less lift while it's spinning around at the same speed, and in theory this means that that side would fall a little bit. Now at first here you can see it wasn't really working out that great, it was sort of just deforming everything, so I ended up deleting a lot of the support structure to hopefully make this happen, and it was a lot more support structure I had to delete than I was expecting. But once I loaded in here, you can see it's a little bit more flimsy, but it was still holding together too well. It was actually supporting itself, so I ended up doing is deleting almost all the wood, but now it was actually too weak. And that was a good thing in this case, because that means if I add a whole bunch of rods in theory it'll hold it all together, but I'll be able to compress this down a little bit and get the sort of design I want. So here you can see I'm putting in those rods, and it took quite a while to get these all the way around here, but you can see once I finished it up, loading in here, and it still was sort of falling apart. It kind of compressed the way I wanted, but it wasn't quite right. So I added in some more rods into the inside like this, and it still was just falling apart on me. And with this design, it may have worked, but the other problem was just that I was kind of afraid that it was going to be really unstable as well if it was falling apart this easily. And my new idea was just to use 2 rods on the very last part of the spiral, and that would be just enough to be able to tilt me forward or back, or left or right, wherever I need to go. So at first here, you can see I'm just tilting right into the ground, and it's because the rod actually weighs too much, and it was completely messing around with the center of gravity. So I lowered it a little bit here, and you can see it actually was tilting forward just fine, but tilting backward was for some reason a big problem. And you can see here I have the rods fully expanded out, so they should create a ton of lift back, but I'm still tilting forward. And if you look at this design, the front blades are spinning much slower than the back ones. And I think what's happening is those are kind of working as brakes, and they're stopping the front from spinning as much, and therefore it's creating much less lift. So what I ended up doing was adding in some rods to the back as well, but I only have the rods in a position where they can contract. They can't expand, which means they can only make the propeller they're sitting on create less thrust. And you can see here sort of how that works. The front right now, if I turn those down, I'm able to tilt forward, and if I turn the back ones down, I'm able to go back as well. And that honestly seemed to be working pretty well, even at high speeds here. So what I wanted to do next was add in the side-to-side controls, and these are pretty easy to do. Basically, you need to stack 2 rods on top of each other like this. The whole idea is that if I press left and right, it'll end up compressing down the top rod, and if I go forward and back, it compresses the bottom rod. So you can see here, I can compress the front ones, I can compress the back ones, I can compress the left ones, and over here you can see I can compress the right ones. So that looking good, wanted to give it a quick test flight, and what I wanted to try doing was flying from the one airport to the other on the airport map. This is sort of my standard test to see how well things fly, and this is like 96 times speed. It's a very slow aircraft, but you can see I do end up getting to the other airport, and when I was trying to go down, what I wanted to do was drive this in reverse, because I was kind of thinking if I did that, I might go down faster, and it did. It was just a little too fast, and I couldn't really fix it, so I ran into the mountains, so I had to reset. I'm gonna pretend that didn't happen though, and now flying to the other airport, falling down is again a little bit of a problem, but you can see here, able to land just fine, and I can fly all the way over there. Then finally here, I just have some extra shots I got while I was flying this around. So guys, thanks for watching. It's definitely a fun video to make. Thought it was such a quirky concept that I just had to give it a shot. So if you have any other ideas for what I can make in Dream Car Builder, let me know down in the comments. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and otherwise, until next time.